Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now.
January 23rd, 2025. This time, Trump knows what he's doing edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. From New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School. Emily Bazelon in New Haven. Hi, Emily.
Hello, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Then, from New York City and the CBS Evening News, John Dickerson, who starts his big new job on Monday. Hello, John.
Hello, David. Hello, Emily. It's good to be with you.
This week on the Gabfest, we will discuss Trump's extraordinary week one action, his week one mandates, the massive changes that are already sweeping the federal government, federal workforce, policies, and behaviors in the government. Then what will be the consequence of Trump's blanket pardon for almost every January 6th rioter and plotter? Then we'll talk about the symbolism, the pomp, and the general weirdness of the Trump inauguration celebration. Plus, of course, we'll have cocktail chatter. Trump re-entered the White House ready to make sweeping change to the government and nation. He came prepared. Unlike in 2017, he has a huge team of people, many who arrive with years or decades of government experience supporting him. He came prepared also because he arrives with the complete support, or fealty, if you want to say, of the majority party, major business leaders. And he also has practically no loud opposition from Democrats and from the left. Or it's not that it's not, it's a loud opposition, but it's disorganized and unclear on what it is trying to accomplish and how it's going to do it. And we saw on day one, Trump fired all 21 cannons, dozens of executive orders targeting immigration policies, federal worker protections, all the DEI officers in the government placed on administrative leave. These orders, the actions of this week have had an astonishing range. The ending birthright citizenship down to renaming the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America, federal workers back to the office, a hiring freeze on the non-military government, suspending refugee programs, refugee resettlement, declaring a national emergency at the border, an invasion at the border, ordering the Pentagon to engage in border protection work. It just goes on and on. We could just spend the entire hour here just listing the things that have happened. Some are going to be litigated. We can get to that. But it's very clear that a lot of these things are things that Trump can do as the president. What, John, in what's happened in these first few days feels most consequential to you? Because there's so much, some of it's chaff, some of it will not be real, but what feels like this is real and it will be significant?
I think the pardons of the January 6th rioters is because it's done. It's like the other things, they will happen, but there will be challenges in the execution. I don't mean challenges in terms of resistance, although in some cases there will be, but there will be operational challenges. Trump has a history of claiming big, broad, magnificent expectations and then delivering quite a bit less. That was true with his border wall. It was true with getting the border wall paid for by Mexico and et cetera. So we have to wait and see how some of these things play out, for which he has authority, but which we just have to see in the execution. Other things like ending birthright citizenship, I think, are totally symbolic, and the point there being among the symbolic points are that he wants to show that the door to America is closed, double locked, and nailed, and the outrage and the lawsuits over ending birthright citizenship help send that message, because he believes very strongly, as he would say, that if you send a public message, this is why he said family breaking up migrant families was important, because it sent a message. So, but with the pardon of the rioters, that's done. It's over. It's happened. And obviously it's happened on the day that he was benefiting from the ceremonies of the peaceful transfer of power. And then he pardoned all the people who, in some cases, injured between 140 and 150 law enforcement officers in their attempt to thwart the peaceful transfer of power. It's just both, it's a real thing and it has an extraordinary symbolic significance.
I totally agree about the significance of the pardons. I think also really consequential is what has been set in motion for really changing the federal government. Like the idea of firing or displacing tens of thousands of people, of gutting the federal government, and also of just making it a much more political operation so that, you know, you set a precedent that whoever comes into office really takes over the staffing parts of the federal government, as well as this relatively small tier of political appointees that lead the various departments. I mean, that system of, you know, partisan leadership with career staff and many more career staff in terms of actual like human beings has been the model that we've had for our modern big executive branch administrative state. And that seems like it's just fundamentally could hugely shift. I want to especially call out the Justice Department. I mean, if the Justice Department really turns into an arm of the president and its independence in terms of decision making about prosecutions really changes under Trump, that will also be a sea change. It's one a future president could switch back. You know, this really goes back to Watergate and the norms and rules we've had in place since Watergate. But that would be an enormous challenge and difference from the way the government has operated.
David, can I ask you a question as somebody who's actually run things and tried to hire people and or not tried to, has in fact hired people and also tries to get teams to do things? What Emily's talking about is when I hear about that, I mean, it's not only getting rid of the expertise that shouldn't really have a political valence, but it's just the hiring job you'd have to do. And then when you have to hire that many people, how hard is that to do? And then how difficult is it to get a new group of people to row in the same direction quickly?
I think there are a lot of different answers to this. I mean, there are Silicon Valley companies that are founded on the principle that we're just going to hire lots and lots and lots of people really quickly. You know, 60% of them aren't going to work out. That's okay. We're just going to get rid of them, and we'll churn new people in very, very fast. And that speed, while disruptive, will be our get us where we want to go and find the team that we need eventually. I absolutely believe that they will get overwhelming cooperation from the government, from government employees. Like there will be some small set of people who can, because they're at the end of their career or are at, have other options, who will leave and be like, all right, I'm done here. But I think overwhelmingly people are going to stay because people need to protect their employment. Most people do not have the security to be able to opt out of their work. And they will be demoralized. And that, I guess the question is like, a demoralized workforce, like how effective is a demoralized workforce working for goals that they don't really want to work for? And I think it will be less effective and less efficient than a workforce that is excited about the work. But I don't know whether it's like 80% less effective or it's 10% less effective. I don't know. I mean, I think it's really hard to hire good people, and it's really hard to get teams moving. But one of the things you have to remember is that in a lot of these cases, they don't actually want the agencies to work. They don't particularly care if the Department of Education works well, right? They care if the military works well, but they don't care if the Department of Education or HUD or EPA. Like they'd be fine if those people just stopped doing their job well. They'd be okay with it, right?
I'm not actually sure they do care about the military working well for two reasons. They're talking about, their plan is to put Pete Hegseth at the head of it. And also what they're doing right now is taking U.S. Northern Command, which I assume is like the part of the military that is in the United States and nearby, and asking it to take on this giant task of closing the border, which has not ever been the military's traditional role. So I just want to disagree. I mean, I don't know what working well means, but I think there are like serious policy questions about that.
How, if the Northern Command is on the southern border, are they also going to invade Greenland? Or is the European Command going to invade Greenland? Really interesting question. I also thought I was struck by, I mean, there's so many things to be struck by. Like the DEI stuff, whatever, that was not surprising. I mean, I was surprised at how quickly and sweeping it was, but I wasn't surprised. But I do find it interesting the way that they have done things like at NIH, a friend of mine, NIH, noted that they have forbidden all presentations. So if you're a scientist at NIH, you can literally not present your research now outside to anybody. you cannot speak. Nobody can make any public communications at NIH. And science, of course, is a process of public communication. Now, I assume that will change when stuff gets monitored. But the idea that that level of control over the messaging and daily operations of government, even at the level of scientific research, is pretty radical.
That would seem to clash with the executive order proclaiming to remove all free speech
barriers,
restrictions. But, that's an interesting point, David, because what's the basic human desire? It's to communicate with other people. I mean, when you talk about morale and who's going to do these jobs, it does seem to me that you come into a question of just basic human impulses about why one does what one wants to do. And when you don't let somebody communicate when that's a part of their job, I would think that would be the kind of demoralization you're talking about.
And also the sort of Stasi informant quality of the stuff around DEI, where they've said, if you do not report people who are attempting to carry out DEI operations, you yourself will be subject to discipline.
Also, something I don't understand is what DEI actually means in the federal government right now. Like, is it equal opportunity initiatives that are actually required by federal law and, are things that have been in place mostly for a long time? Or is there layered on top of that, or maybe instead of that, things that go beyond that seem like they have more of an anti-racism platform and effect and aim? I just have no idea. That umbrella term has become this like boogeyman, but it could be that there's lots of things included in that are actually like important and necessary and legally required. Who knows?
What did you make, Emily, of them? The rescinding of that 1965 order which barred discrimination in federal contracting and hiring?
Well, that's what I mean. That I don't understand how that can just suddenly be gone, and that can be. I mean, look, I do understand in a more meta sense. I think a lot of these orders that seem to be either on their face really questionable in terms of legality, or even laughable, and I would put birthright citizenship in that category, John, as you would. Like the idea that the president can just decide that we don't have that anymore one day is just not how American law works. But you can see what is happening. It's we're going to do all these things and someone is going to have to stop us. It's daring the courts to stop them, as opposed to having any sense that you're supposed to put things together in a way in which like you might want it to pass legal muster.
This is one of the great experiments going on, which just goes back to your point, David, about Silicon Valley and the way they do hiring. The normal way you run a White House, and this was codified by H.R. Haldeman, which is kind of funny that Nixon's chief of staff would be the one everybody followed, but was that everything had to be run through all the agencies it affected, that it had to be looked at by the PR marketing people in the White House, and kind of cleaned down to its last syllable to come out of the president's mouth or to be associated with the president. The Trump administration is just iteration after iteration after, like, I don't know, just let's do it and we'll figure out, let somebody stop us. If they don't stop us, great. I mean, it's almost like the immunity claim. It's like, it's outrageous to think that presidents are above the law even after they're out of office. And he's like, yeah, well, let's try it. Let's see what happens, And then, whoops, turns out you discover this new thing that's granted to you. And the problem, of course, with that is that there's a lot of rubble in the process, and that can cause collateral damage. But it seems like it's basically we're going to just govern in public, and it's like the confirmation process. Trump didn't vet his people; he just nominated them, and if stuff comes out, they'll get vetted by the public. Is the way he's talked about it.
And it's also pell-mell, and so much of it that a lot of it is getting lost, right? It's just impossible to pay attention to all of it. And so you kind of count on that, which was such a tactic of the first administration. And now it just feels like it's back, but on steroids.
Yeah, it's Steve Bannon's flood the zone with excrement.
I think they're not really flooding the zone with excrement. I like that's very CBS Evening News of that interview there, John. Like we used to be able to say the word shit here on the Gabfest, but
you still may.
More.
You still may.
But I think what they're flooding the zone with legally vetted executive orders. I mean,
but some of them are ridiculous.
Well, but some of them are ridiculous, but they have they have enough. I think the birthright citizenship, you're right, is like put up so that there will be challenges, so that it will be shot down, so that they can, complain about courts and
because immigration is really good terrain for them to be fighting over.
Yeah, but they've also like a whole bunch of other things. Like they've declared that asylum, no one can get asylum if they've transited through a country that has a communicable disease in it. Like because every country has communicable diseases in it, so no one can get asylum. Like that will pass muster. That is a legal.
I don't think that's clear at all.
Want to make a bet?
I'm sure I can bet on that. Yes,
yeah.
I will.
I think
will
the
happily
declaration
take that bet.
I think the latitude to kind of declare a national emergency and set it around whatever parameters, this Supreme Court is going to give that wide latitude.
Let me add into this the
you
TikTok
could totally
thing.
Be right. We'll
the
see.
TikTok thing is not defensible, right?
No,
Emily.
Yes,
totally.
Right.
Not.
Exactly.
Also, but I don't know. I didn't know the answer to this when I was asked. But I mean, I know it's not defensible. I know, but it's happening, right? So how is it?
Well, let's explain what you mean, right? I think what you mean is that the law said that TikTok, of course, was going to be banned on January 19th unless there was a viable buyer on the table. And I remember saying this on this very show, those many weeks ago. And in that case, then the president could suspend the ban from going into effect for a limited period. There is no buyer on the table, and the Biden administration decided not to enforce the ban on the last day. And then, Trump is not enforcing it. And so all of a sudden, this Supreme Court order, which said the ban could go into effect, is meaningless. And I don't understand that at all.
Well, but I guess my point about that, when Steve Bannon was talking about that, he was saying you flood the zone with everything and people can't pay attention. And they're definitely doing that. But I guess what I'm trying to draw the distinction between what happened in 2017 and what happened now is that it's not just they're not just flooding the zone with crazy rhetoric or, making lies about the number of people at the inauguration. They're flooding it with things that they have been working on for years that have enough legal cover. They're wearing enough clothing that they can get moving with it. They are going to actually do so many more things than they were able to do in 2017 because they actually have people working on it who are not stupid, and they have the support of the Republican Party. So,
yes, agree,
so it's different. I think
agree.
It's different. That's what to me is like they're so much better prepared than in 2017, and we are already seeing the consequences of that, like in the federal government, in all of these things.
Right, and we're picking out the things that are legally questionable, but there's so much happening that, for sure, you're right.
So it's what they're calling shock and awe, which is an interesting phrase to pick because, of course, shock and awe is supposed to be overwhelming and devastating bombing that not just destroys things, but also creates a psychological fear in the enemy. So it's interesting to think through who the enemy is and so forth. But then also secondarily, this is a point we were making before and have made plenty of times before. Shock and awe worked at the beginning, but the most recent use of it in the most sort of publicly well-known use of it was in Iraq, and the post-shock and awe execution and what do you do now with this country we invaded was a disaster. And that, it seems to me, is a useful way to think about the Trump administration, which is they are loaded. And this, by the way, is best practice as far as if you're coming in as an administration, honeymoons are shorter. There's a lot of work that should be done before you ever get in to have this kind of quick moving on the first day. It's what Mitt Romney was preparing to do when he thought he was going to win in 2012. So it's not that there's anything wrong with it. In fact, it's quite a smart thing to do to really pre-prepare. But the question is, are you able to carry any of it out? And that's where the analogy between shock and awe and the collapse in Iraq seems to me to be, useful.
Well, it is weird. I think to your point about who's the enemy here. I mean, it is so upsetting that this administration and this entire political movement seems to view A, people on the left as literally the enemy, and B, the government as literally the enemy. The government, which has enormous capacity to do all kinds of things and things for good. And like if you devastate the capacity of the National Weather Service to do good forecasts, like what have you really accomplished? Like what is that a good thing that anybody in the whole world wants? Of course not. If you devastate the capacity of the IRS to collect taxes, again, like the government can't operate without their revenue. It's so befuddling. It's not like it's not a coherent view, I think, of what government is. And that's what disturbs me.
Well, but I think you have said it earlier, which is that if you're engaged in a different project, then the coherent view is not to have it work, or to have it work on your narrow aims. So it's just a different project.
And also, maybe you think that those kinds of effects are medium to long term, and you're not going to be held responsible for them.
I think they think that, yeah, for sure, right? Like that you can devastate a bureaucracy's capacity, but it doesn't. People might not notice today, and then they'll just be more and more disillusioned about government. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by GiveWell. GiveWell is a nonprofit that researches and recommends giving opportunities and is committed to maximizing the impact of donations. Each recommendation is grounded in months of rigorous research and transparency to ensure your contribution has the greatest possible impact on the world. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 125,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion, and rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving, so you can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. And when you make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, GiveWell doesn't take a cut. So go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Then select podcast and enter Political Gabfest at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. Decisions made in Washington affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including the policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation fears, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen. Decisions made in Washington affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including the policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation fears, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen. All right, let's turn to the next topic, which sort of we already touched on. Trump pardoned virtually everyone convicted of January 6th offenses, commuted the sentences of a few people he didn't pardon. DOJ will surely, if it hasn't already, end ongoing criminal investigations and prosecutions of other people who committed acts of violence or were trespassed or otherwise were on the wrong side of the law on January 6th. Those pardoned include, as John mentioned, people who committed violent acts. The leader of the Proud Boys, who was not at January 6th, but he was serving 22-year sentence for related crimes. Emily, this was more sweeping even than J.D. Vance was pushing for. Why do you think Trump went all the way to pardoning even the violent people, even the people who clearly came with malevolent intent to, overthrow the peaceful transition of power, as John said?
I mean, if your narrative of January 6th is that it was all sun and flowers and puppy dogs, then every single person who's in jail for it is in jail for terrible, wrong reasons and is a hostage. There's no way to have a kind of half measure set of a way of thinking about clemency. And Trump is fully bought in, and the Republican Party is fully bought in. They are about to relaunch committee investigations in which they're going to create this false narrative that Nancy Pelosi is to blame for the insurrection at the Capitol.
Wait, but is there an insurrection? If Nancy Pelosi is to blame, then there is an insurrection.
Well, I guess
Or
the
was there
idea
no
is there's a
insurrection?
false flag operation. I mean, you're right. There is a logical inconsistency there. But from Trump's point of view, everything that everyone did who got in trouble was totally fine, right? And then Congress is also going to create this other way of thinking about all the images that came and the reality of the evidence that came out of that day. I guess that's the idea. It is kind of a split consciousness.
But there is this chasm of cognitive dissonance that exists between blaming Nancy Pelosi for all of the violence and then saying there was no violence and therefore all the people who were falsely claimed to participating in it should be pardoned. Another massive act of dissonance is that a congressional, it was passed through an act of Congress to put a plaque on the wall of the Capitol commemorating the law enforcement officers who were injured defending the Capitol. That plaque has not been put up. How do you put up the plaque now? What were they defending against if there was nothing done wrong? But it was what strikes me about there's been reporting in Axios basically that what happened was there was a case by case basis going on. As you said, David, J.D. Vance said it should be case by case, that obviously people involved in violence shouldn't be pardoned. Jim Jordan of the House, not exactly a softie, said the same thing about case by case. And that basically what happened was it was taking too long. And Trump said, screw it, let's just pardon them all. So that gives you a couple of, this is not small beer. This is like this peaceful transfer of power. It's a kind of the central thing in the American system. But secondarily, if the way of operating in the early administration is, it takes a little bit longer than we wanted, screw it, we'll just go with the maximum, that probably doesn't bode well for other decision making. And I should also note, in a way, though, this is in perfect keeping with Trump's sense of power that has been so amazingly successful for him in this political comeback he has launched, which is, here's what he's asking Republicans to do. The people who came and threatened you physically, and we saw many Republican lawmakers running out of the building, so we know they felt under physical threat, or they felt intimidated anyway. We're going to let them off the hook. And all you cops that still work at the Capitol, some of whom were there that day, we're letting all these people off the hook. And you, the lawmakers who were running away, whose physical body was threatened and who have to face these cops every day, you have to just take it. Because none of them have spoken out. Lisa Murkowski did, but she's barely a Republican. None of them have said this is an outrage. And they probably won't. That's an amazing act of dominance by Trump over his party. And I think he has seen that one act of dominance begets another. I mean, in other words, it builds his sense of power. It doesn't diminish it within his own party.
I think that's very well said. I mean, these are the members of Congress, the senators are the Capitol Police. Those are the people who potentially saved them from serious injury, right? I think there are two other things. One is that the other reason that you let everybody out is that you want to sow fear, right? These are people who have been very radicalized, were radical before. We have it on record that there was a plan to use violence in some cases to overthrow the government. You want them out there. I mean, the next demand is to let out the people who kidnapped and threatened to assassinate Gretchen Whitmer. And if you have all these militia, that helps this sort of instill fear. I mean, so much of what is going on in this first week is about instilling fear and trying to chill dissent by doing that. I mean, the other part of this is just staggering is I hope that the idea that the Republican Party is the party of law and order can be put to bed from these pardons. I mean, there is nothing that any progressive style law enforcement official has ever done that is anywhere near this kind of upending of the system. This was the biggest Justice Department prosecution in history. They put prosecutors, everybody working on these cases, the judges, people put enormous amounts of time and energy into this because of what John said. This is not small beer. It was about the peaceful transfer of power. And now all of that is just completely out the window.
Do you think that the January 6th investigation was a mistake? Was it a bad idea to try to go and break the back of the violent forces on the far right by pursuing these criminal prosecutions? Or is it only a mistake because it is now? I mean, clearly it is a mistake because the reverse has happened. These people have been emboldened. Anyone who wishes to engage in violent conspiracy on behalf of the president, this president knows that they have latitude to do it. But was it a mistake? Could anyone have foretold this, do you think?
I find it really surprising. And I think, based on what we were talking about, the view of other Republicans who were not interested in going this far, I think it is truly surprising that people who beat up police officers have gotten out of prison or planned, sedition against the government. So no, I don't think it was a mistake. I think, first of all, you have some kind of interim show of force of the government. I mean, some people have spent at least some time behind bars, and that's important for deterrence. You can't have zero punishment. I don't know. You could ask questions. I think I was wondering about this a few weeks ago. Like, did they need to go after every single person who just walked in the door? Because that kind of created this idea that all these people had been caught up in this melee and hadn't actually done anything, were also being punished. My sense is that those people were not actually getting really harsh sentences. So I'm kind of agnostic about that. But the people who perpetrated violence or planned sedition on January 6th, like, the government had to go after those people. That's the job of the Justice Department.
It seems to me that this all traces its roots back to the power of the idea that the election was stolen, and the reason that needed to be confronted briskly and publicly by members of the president's own party at a time when they were feeling courageous. Because one of the ways in which people think about these pardons, who are the supporters of the president, is that the rioters on January 6th, Emily, your case is, I think, one way that they think about it, which is January 6th was no big deal. They were just tourists. It was, no big deal. The other is they were heroes acting against an unjust system that was allowing a stolen election to take place. And therefore, it was okay to break the law because the law was being so severely broken in order to steal the election from Donald Trump. So that original lie and the way it was allowed to grow and the way it was then ratified by all those members of Congress who were outraged originally at Donald Trump and then went and endorsed him, I think that allows or creates a permission structure for people being okay with these pardons in a way too.
I think the Widmer crime, the Widmer plot criminals, that case, those people will be really interesting because that has nothing to do with the election. It has to do with some crazy theories about COVID, and it is an indefensible act, except I suppose if you say, they were entrapped by the FBI or some nonsense like that. And they were genuinely radical people. There were just a few of them. And if they get pardoned, man, I feel like that is a real open season on doing whatever you want to advance right-wing political aims. Do you guys think, what I keep coming back to is I think there's a lot of Americans who find DEI annoying and they want to be able to, tell sexist jokes and not feel bad about it. I do not think that this country, I know the country has changed, and I know people are not exactly the same as they were 20 years ago. I understand that, but I don't think there's majority support for far right anti-government insurrection and beating up U.S. Capitol Police and white supremacy that is really widespread in the United States. I just don't feel like that's there.
I agree with you. The question is, what's the price for it? I mean, it was not Donald Trump losing the election. And until there is a price for it, it doesn't, yes, that could be true,
and
but
I
it
think
can coexist with these other electoral outcomes.
To keep that question before the voters and the public in a way that's politically damaging requires somebody to talk about it. And it was very amusing on the day of the inauguration when people covering the inauguration, including myself, would note that here he is being inaugurated in the Capitol Rotunda, which was such a focal point of the riots on the 6th of January. And a lot of the president's supporters would say, look at the press. They keep bringing up January 6th. Donald Trump, all throughout the day, kept bringing up January 6th. He went into Emancipation Hall after his inauguration address and gave an address to his diehard supporters and said, my staff kept telling me, don't talk about January 6th and the pardons in the inaugural address. It'll mess it up. And he kept talking about how he really wanted to, but they told him not to. And then he went on and on about how the election was rigged and so forth. Then later in the arena, later in the evening, same deal. He was the one who kept going and returning to it. But absent that, it would require Democrats to make a big deal of this. And then Republicans, including probably the president at some point, would say, why are you so focused on the past? We have problems of the present, and you're just stuck in the past. And I think you're probably right, David, about the general public's view about letting people off who used a stun gun on the neck of a policeman or a flagpole to batter them or a fire extinguisher. But I don't know how that stays in the conversation in a way that changes the political, because the country already at some level, or a majority of voters in the electoral system with the presidency, decided that January 6th wasn't a big enough deal to keep Donald Trump out of office.
I mean, isn't this the canniness of Trump? If you had asked us honestly, before January 20th, is it likely that Donald Trump is going to pardon every single, right? I mean, Pam Bondi said this wasn't going to happen, are about to be attorney general in her confirmation hearings last week. If the press had gone around saying like, he's going to pardon every single one, it would have seemed kind of batshit, right? Like, oh, come on. And how would you think that? And then it happens, but it happens at the very beginning of, Trump's administration. Is that this going to be top of mind for voters in 2026 or 2028? Probably not.
And on the maximum day, it's hard for his allies in Congress to say boo about it.
Right.
Because what are you going to do? Criticize the president on the day he's been inaugurated?
And then all the dominance dynamics that we were talking about that you were bringing up, John, completely start going into effect.
I'm really glad that I don't find myself as a Republican legislator at this moment, because I do not know how you resist dominance except by opting out, except by choosing to disassociate yourself. Like it's very hard within a tribe that is that powerfully united and is that devoted to a particular person to dissent in any effective way. And the only people we see who've done it, like Liz Cheney, like are anathema now, right?
And gone. Anathema and banished.
And how does this undo? How does this get undone? I mean, Trump will die at some point. He will no longer exist. He will not be the head of the party. And you can assume that whoever succeeds him will not have his charisma, which I think is probably, like, he does have this wicked charisma that surpasses anybody else. And so no one else will be able to maintain that. But, till then, for the next 4 years, like, how does this get undermined?
Well, and you're right. And implicit in what you're saying is the fact that it's not just that you're a member of a tribe, but you are, because of your job, which is to say to staying in office, raising money, keeping the support of those kinds of voters, you must make nearly daily acts of fealty to that group. So it's not just breaking from it. You have to kind of refresh the connection in order to stay in good stead, either for the general election in your state or district, or to stay clear of a primary process, which both the president feels no problem with challenging, setting on a primary to somebody who misbehaves within his own party, but he also now has an exterior media force in Elon Musk, who has said he would primary and challenge people. Now, whether he does or doesn't, choosing to buck Trump and Elon Musk is a multi-million-dollar thing, because you have to raise the multi-million-dollars to combat what you would be getting from Trump and Musk. So it's hard to do.
I mean, I think what you're describing, though, I think is clear. It's within the Republican Party. I don't think it means that this kind of politics dominates the public and the whole country for 4 years, because people can express disagreement and things that are unpopular may change the course of what the Trump administration actually does, right? I mean, they really have tremendous power. It is true. The federal government is a big ship that you can turn in a lot of different directions. It is also true that public opinion matters a great deal to Trump. We have seen that over and over again. And so the public has, I think, still a lot of power in deciding exactly how this course of events unfolds and how far it all goes.
I think that's probably true. I don't know if it's Trump so much that I don't know where he is on these days, but what you say is exactly right, Emily, in the sense that the first midterm elections for presidents after they're reelected or elected are often quite bad. And remember, Trump lost 41 seats in 2018. Ronald Reagan lost a whole mess load of seats in 82. Obama in 2010. Biden did not good in 22, although not as bad as they thought, which is part of his story. But and what starts to happen is public opinion may not affect Trump, but it will affect those Republicans who want to get reelected in districts that are not full of MAGA, and they will make things in Congress a little bit more difficult for him. So there are constraints. The other constraints, of course, we should just run through them quickly, are surprises. Things will happen which will delay and distract. That often happens in presidencies, and just in general, the Congress is a place that's quite difficult, and particularly with the lack of a margin in the House.
I want to stay on this topic for one more second, just to hit on Biden pardoning members of his family, as well as General Milley and Liz Cheney and various other political opponents of Trump, preemptively pardoning them so that Trump effectively could not use the Department of Justice to go after them directly, at least for crimes. I'm sure he could find other ways to go after them. It was obviously an abuse of the pardon power. And yet, as with so many things, Trump has this ability to make people act against their own principles and beliefs to prevent a greater wrong. And so a nation crumbles.
Yeah, well, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. I'm sorry. I mean, I think there are two groups here. There's like Milley and Fauci and Cheney, who actually had Trump railing against them, and Kash Patel, who is probably going to be the next director of the FBI, et cetera. And then there are the members of Biden's family. And that there was something so self-serving and venal about that. I mean, these are 5 people who nobody had ever heard of. No one was talking about prosecuting them. And the idea that what you're going to part with your own principles over is these family members who are not at risk, I really found that hard to swallow.
I mean, ironically, it probably puts them at more danger because they now have a target. It's like they'll be targeted for audits and all sorts of civil things that they weren't thinking about because nobody cared about them.
It was just so unnecessary and self-serving, and not what former President Biden was supposed to stand for.
Yeah, and if you're on Team Save Democracy, implicit in that, as unpleasant as it may be, is that you have to maintain these standards even in the face of all kinds of pulls to not maintain them. And you can blow that off and say, well, we're in a different kind of politics now and Donald Trump has changed it. But as David then says, then you're playing on his turf. And turns out he is better at playing on that turf because he's lived on it his whole life than you, who have set yourself up as the standards maintainer.
And tactically speaking, if you're going to do it, make it worth something real.
What do you mean?
Don't have it be about pardoning your family members who are not at any risk of being prosecuted. Pick something that has some other larger value where you're leaving on some kind of message that you stand for something.
Well, look, the man gave his life for the government. He served nobly. Okay, think of what he lost with his family also. Think of how much his family has suffered. I mean, he lost wife, child, other child while serving in these roles.
Two things can be true at the same time. He can have had personal loss and sadness, and but that doesn't absent him from analysis of every decision he ever makes.
No, of course. But I guess I feel like the scale of this wrong, I agree, it was wrong. It undermines it undermines the foundation of the pardon power. Looks corrupt. I agree, it was a mistake. I just feel like when you put that tiny little grain of sand in a balance, in a scale next to what Trump has done, it is. And I also feel like it is Trump has caused him to do it. And so the blame belongs again to Trump, I feel. But maybe I'm wrong.
I just think collapsing the distinction right at the end in this way was super unhelpful. I don't think it's the biggest deal in the entire world. And I realize that lots of other important things are happening, but it's not nothing.
Yeah. And it's not, obviously, it's not equivalent.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life isn't about resolutions that fade by February. It's about picking up the pen and becoming the author of your own life. And therapy can help you write new chapters and create the meaningful story you deserve to live. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy more accessible, affordable, and convenient. BetterHelp has a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you feel like your matched therapist isn't the right one for you, you can easily switch therapists at any time with no extra cost. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/gabfest today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/gabfest.
Planned Parenthood Federation of America exists so that all people can get access to the sexual and reproductive care and education they need to make informed decisions about their health. More than 2 million patients a year rely on the services Planned Parenthood health centers provide, like STI testing and treatment, birth control, gender-affirming care, abortion, cancer screenings, and so much more. Right now, all across the country, reproductive health care and rights are under attack from public officials who are out of step with the will of the vast majority of Americans. The constitutional right to abortion, control of our bodies, and the health care we need has been stolen from us. And now politicians in 47 states, yes, 47, have introduced bills that would block people from getting the sexual and reproductive care they need. Planned Parenthood knows that equitable access to health care, including safe, legal abortion, is a human right. Right now, Planned Parenthood needs your help to protect access to health care. Donate today by visiting plannedparenthood.org/protect.
Let's talk a little bit as a third topic about Trump's inauguration, which was weird. The usual mix of pomp. There was pomp and relatively normal stuff, but there was also this ecstatic, excited campaign rally, the stunning, I thought, a remarkable display of fealty, obeisance, corporate obeisance to Trump in the form of the entire tech overlord class showing up to witness his anointing, and then that strange hand gesture from Elon Musk. But John, you were on the air forever. Covering
Tell us,
this.
what was it?
I ignored it. I mean, I was traveling through most of this. I paid as little attention as I could. What seemed important to you?
First of all, this is a day of great joy and celebration for all the people who support Donald Trump. And so it was fully in keeping with that and his rallies and the whole Trump. It was Trump in full, and that's a joy to all of the people who elected him. What struck me about the actual speech is that the darkness in it, two things. One, the darkness in it is necessary to justify all the things he will do. So I was thinking about other presidents who've been accused of being dictators, and FDR, of course, is the one that comes most to mind. There were even a lot of Democrats who were saying, well, okay, maybe a dictator would be useful. Maybe we need our own Mussolini when FDR came into office. And the argument was the times were so dire that they needed somebody with who could act with dispatch and bold, persistent experimentation. But you had 25% unemployment. The country was in a much different state. And so what it felt like Trump's speech was an attempt to say, no, things are as bad. Things are so incredibly awful that I am your savior. And it was very much, it wasn't just I am going to push the limits of power. It is I am power. It was a presidency located in the body of one human person, a person who was saved by divine providence to deliver what he is about to do. It was a super embodiment of the idea that I am the state. So the Greek myths and, the classics of antiquity would suggest that another one of the constraining factors for the second Trump presidency will just be straight up hubris. It was like I alone can do it squared.
Plus, it had this religious talk in it about being saved by God, which was not the case in 2016.
It's interesting. I don't follow inaugurations closely, and I think I've only ever been to a couple, and don't watch them. So, but what I was struck by is what you just said, John, is the personalization of it. To me, the point of an inauguration is not really the person becoming president. It is the celebration of the civic religion of the United States, which is that we can peacefully transfer power from one person to another, and that we're celebrating ourselves almost. And instead it became a celebration of him rather than a celebration of the nation. But maybe all inaugurations are as personalized as his was.
No, I mean, they are somewhat. Certainly, when Washington went to his first inauguration, it's hysterical because he had to ride there. It took a long time to get up to New York, and he told every state along the way, "Stop it! Don't just let me get through. I want to move quietly. Don't have a celebration." And none of them listened to him. In one Philadelphia, maybe he's coming through, and they have young girls dressed all in white strewing rose petals before his carriage as he rides through. When he would go to dinner, there would be endless toasts. So the dinners would go on and on and on. And his feeling was, this is everything you're doing suggests that I am a king and that the country is embodied in me. And that's a disaster because that's what we're trying to get away from. And I think there's been, I went back and read or looked at a lot of the inaugural addresses, and the form is pretty standard, which is there's a celebration, as you said, David, of us, of we. And implicit in that, of course, is that the greatness of the nation is embodied in this moment. And yes, I am the person at the center of this moment. It's implicit. And also the president is acting in concert with this great national thing. Whereas Trump, it was like everything flows into me. And also, obviously, there's a reach for unity in any of these speeches. In Trump's case, it's very, they've talked about how he's going to give unifying speeches since 2016, and he never gives a unifying speech by the standards of normal unity. And what are the standards of normal unity? It's showing a kind of respect and deference for the outgoing party. It's engaging in, at least at a rhetorical level, with some of the ideas or interests of the other party. We know this from human cooperation. It's obvious what unity is. In Trump's case, I think unity is those tech CEOs. In other words, unity means you've come to my side. And so I think that was part of their display. That was the part of the reason they were on display there, sitting in front of his cabinet picks, very much a part of the tableau, is that is the kind of unity he expects and is going for. And again, for somebody who has an understanding of power and knows how to husband it and create it, it's worked pretty well for him.
Do you think those tech CEOs are there because they actually think this is a good course for America and they're glad to see Trump and at last tech will be unleashed? Or they're there because it's just they have come to recognize my corporation does not want to be in the gun sights of this president, so let's just do what we need to do publicly?
Half and half.
Yeah. I feel like Zuckerberg and Musk are there because they're excited about it, and the rest are kind of like, okay. I doubt Tim Cook goes home at night being like, thank goodness America is going to be great again. I doubt that Tim Cook is there.
Somebody who's very smart will write an essay someday about all the things that flow from the U.S. primary system. So, you win the primaries in a party, then all kinds of automatic things kick in. People who didn't like you in the primary kick in and support you because they hate the Democrats more, or vice versa. And so while they didn't like Donald Trump, perhaps Mitch McConnell is a perfect example of this. Mitch McConnell said things about Donald Trump that have never been said about a president from members of their own party. That's, of course, massive hyperbole, but certainly not by somebody who had the stature that McConnell had. And nevertheless, he supported him because he was a Republican. Then the CEO thing is something it feels like it kicks in for me. It's like, yes, it's personally distasteful. You have all of these pundits saying you're there with the bended knee. But what Tim Cook was able to do by convincing Trump not to hit Apple with the tariffs that were put on China during Trump's first administration was hugely beneficial to Apple, which benefits the employees, which benefits the shareholders. And that's his first obligation as a CEO. And so if he has to take a little, as you know, David, as somebody who has to, there's an amount of
excrement eating.
Yes, exactly. There's an amount of sandwich eating that you just have to do as a part of your job. And it's awful, but it's for this greater good that you are engaged in. And I think that's not a difficult thing to convince yourself, because it has the advantage of being true in terms of what your obligations are. Now, that all kicks in because he's won the presidency. So these obligations that are individual to the people create this kind of situation we're in.
I only saw little clips of Musk's weird salute, which our researcher Emily now tells me is very much rooted in the Roman salute, which is in itself a confection and invention of the late 19th century. The Roman salute did not exist in Rome. It was something that was invented. But did you guys think it was weird? Did it have Nazi overtones to you, or was it just this is a physically awkward person doing something that is physically awkward because he just is a person who looks weird whenever he does anything, really, as far as I can tell?
I don't think it was just physical awkwardness. I think that he was trolling in some way that was considered. I mean, also deniable, right? Because it wasn't a full-on Nazi salute. And so then you can say that everyone's just totally overreacting, which was eventually, I think, what he posted on X. But I think it was like deliberate muddling. And I find that discomforting, again, because it kind of forced other people to take stances. I mean, then you have the Anti-Defamation League telling everyone not to overreact, which seemed in that moment to be super craven. And so I found the whole thing kind of unsettling, even though, and I think the uncertainty is kind of the point.
Yeah, it's a power move again. And also, there are lines you're not supposed to cross. Watch me cross it. Oh, turns out that line was meaningless. And, doing anything that looks like Sig Heil is, something you're not supposed to do, especially on the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day and the liberation of Auschwitz. Because, there is sort of all very obvious. Well, I'm going to do it. And so it's a massive flex. And it was not just physical awkwardness.
And it's also about what's beyond the pale and what's not beyond the pale, and changing those goalposts in some way that then calls into question, okay, maybe Hitler isn't so bad. Maybe he isn't sui generis. Maybe we change the way we think about this part of history the same way we've changed how we think about January 6th. It makes it feel like it's all up for grabs, these kind of settled historical consensus.
But do you really, Hitler is up for grabs?
I mean, I think to Elon Musk, there is something about, what was he doing, David? You think he just it's not he did something very deliberate with his body. It didn't look accidental.
Well, I think there is a set of people, and I know because I'm slightly adjacent to them because of my own fascination with history, who are enthralled with Rome, the Roman Empire, America's parallel to the Roman Empire, who get really worked up over Roman stuff, and that Roman salute is part of the language of it. It's part of the grammar of it. And I'm not saying it's not unsettling, and I'm not saying that it's not a weird thing to be obsessed with. But I guess I asked myself, maybe he just is trying to play to that. I bet he's fascinated with Roman history, and that's how he plays dress up. I just don't think there's a lot of people who are really cankering for Hitler to be mainstream now, to platform. No one wants to platform Hitler, really, beyond 7 people. Or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I don't know about the no one.
I think it feels like a pretty large piece of territory you could land on is that might not have been his intent, but he is definitely either massively obtuse to the more modern, contemporary connotations of that movement, or he's screw those ninnies who think that's what I'm doing, because I'm doing this other thing over here, and I don't care about anybody who might misinterpret me. I mean, I think that to me feels like the Occam's razor description. Not that he was thinking, so begins my rehabilitation campaign of Hitler, but it's also not insane to say once you popularize those symbols again, then you are one step closer, whether that was your initial intent or not, to normalizing the behavior of somebody who rightfully is considered mankind's greatest monster.
Right. And you're willing to open the door.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. I bet that Mr. Dickerson, coming home after being on air for, he said 13 hours. I don't know if that was rhetorical exaggeration or true.
I actually think it was 14.
14 hours, whether I bet that Mr. John Dickerson had himself a drink and then said something to the lovely Ann Dickerson that did not have something to do with the inauguration. What is it that he might have said?
Actually, it did neither because he was in Washington. So he was alone in a...
He drank alone. He talked to himself.
I actually didn't even have a drink because it was too late. I went to bed in a freezing cold hotel room where something has happened in our world with control over the temperature in a hotel room. You have no control, really, but they put a thing on the wall that suggests you might have control with a series of buttons that do things like change it from Celsius to Fahrenheit. That's great. Or like turn on a series of lights so that you can see.
Always with the lights.
Yeah.
So with you. And then you can't go to sleep. And why does everyone want those lights flashing?
I love a good Andy Rooney. Can we just Andy Rooney for the rest of the show now?
And also, while we're at it, what's up with the TVs in hotels? They are of distant country from the remote in terms of when you hit the button on the remote, it takes like 45 minutes for the TV to get the signal. Why is that true with TVs?
Or they're already on when you walk in.
Yes, and they can't be turned off. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Also, you can't, like, can you stream stuff on them or not? Like, sometimes it feels like you can stream and then sometimes you can't.
Yeah. No, I've had fine success with that. And we watched the final episode of Shetland. Anne was in town for the earlier part of the weekend, and we beautifully watched Shetland on the hotel room TV. So that was wonderful.
Continuing your unerring streak of only watching television shows
I know,
no one else is watching, making it impossible to ever talk about television shows.
I know, exactly. It's like...
foiling me every time.
It's worse, actually, than my previous posture, which is that I just didn't watch TV because I
didn't have time. It is worse. This is like more tantalizing. It's like, I could imagine that you guys might watch a show that would be fun to discuss. No, it's something I've never heard of.
I completely agree.
Watch.
I completely...
But you're happy.
I'm so
Have you
guilty.
gotten to your chatter yet? Has your chatter
No. This
started? No.
Yeah. This is the point at the cocktail party where everybody has moved away from me. So anyway, my cocktail chatter is about Mount McKinley, which Donald Trump wants to rename Mount McKinley from Mount Denali in Alaska. And what I did not know is that the mountain got its name in 1896 when a gold miner was there. And because McKinley was the Republican nominee who supported the gold standard, not the silver standard, he named the mountain Mount McKinley because he was prospecting for gold. McKinley is from Ohio, not from Alaska, but nevertheless, he was the nominee, the name of the mountain. And that was that was not an official name, but then by 1910, it becomes an official name, or 1950, and I can't remember. Anyway, early 20th century, it becomes the official federal name, in part because not the advocacy of the people in Alaska, but because of the advocacy of strong lawmakers from Ohio, which is not still in Alaska. So it gets named Mount McKinley. That's a federal thing. In the 70s, the government of Alaska says, you know what? We don't want this to be called Mount McKinley, named after a guy from Ohio who never went to Alaska. We want to actually have, by the power of federalism, control of overnaming stuff in our own state. So they vote to call it Mount Denali. Well, the federal government doesn't like that, particularly the lawmakers from Ohio. So they say, no, we're not going to call it that. Well, then Obama does rename it. And once again, the lawmakers from Ohio, not Alaska, like John Boehner, say this is an outrage. And this is besmirching the Ohio Republican McKinley. Anyway, now Donald Trump wants to change it back to McKinley, which you might note is an act of the federal government telling a state what to do, which you might remember is totally antithetical to his view on the way states and the federal government should act when it comes to other issues, most notably, perhaps, you might note, abortion rights.
I don't think it's out of hand to name a mountain in a different state after somebody. I mean, they're all
against
New Hampshire
the wishes
built,
of the state?
Well, I think the name that existed up for 70 years was fine. It's fine for there to be a mountain in Alaska named after President McKinley. Now, they want to change it. That's also fine to change.
Well, right. I mean, if the state decides it wants to change
it. But it's not
the
wrong to have somebody from Ohio getting a mountain named after him in North Dakota or
It was called Denali
Indiana.
because that's what native people in Alaska called it. Just to add that fact.
Also, is it Denali or Mount Denali? I think it's Denali. I don't think they say Mount Denali.
I think it might be saying with au jus, but
exactly.
Which I'm sure I have said.
Good analogy there.
So I'm sure I butchered it. I wasn't making a moral. I wasn't making a moral claim. I was just saying that the locus of the naming of McKinley has nothing to do with his deep ties to the state with the mountain we're talking about here. And since federalism does offer power to the people who actually live in the locality that have to make decisions over their own lives, it is, I think, worthy to note that this is a fight about something that was totally hijacked by the people of Ohio. Anyway.
I wonder what the convention is for naming things in federal national parks, whether that belongs to the state, whether it belongs to the federal government, whether there's some commission that does it.
Ed O'Keefe was saying that there is some federal process for doing this. There is a naming process, but I can't remember what the details of it are. But it's not just by the whim of a president. It has to go through a process.
I feel like that was a whole topic all in and of itself. Emily, what is your chatter?
My chatter is about a new study that is being published today by NEJM Evidence. That is the name of the journal. It is associated with the New England Journal of Medicine. The new study is about a possible alternative to mifepristone, which is the abortion pill that is more regulated by the federal government and has been a target of lawsuits and legislation from abortion opponents. This other drug is called ulipristal acetate, and it is the main ingredient in the morning after pill Ella. Turns out that a double dose of Ella works as an abortion pill. This is a small study, but it goes through 9 weeks of pregnancy. And I'm writing a piece about it in the Times Today with Pam Bellick, our fabulous science writer. It's interesting for a couple reasons. One is that abortion opponents have been saying for a long time that morning after pills could cause abortion. So that is going to stoke potentially political opposition to the morning after pill. It also opens up possibilities for a new drug regimen if mifepristone access to it really gets diminished in the United States. And so there are also reproductive health advocates who are excited about this study. So that all makes the study interesting. I should also note ulipristal acetate, marketed as Ella, is available simply with a prescription in the United States. It doesn't have extra restrictions attached to it the way mifepristone does. And so, if there turns out to be an effort to oppose access to it, that would have to go back through the approval process at the FDA. It's been available in the United States for many years. It's actually available over the counter in Europe. So this is a really interesting development in this world of abortion and contraception. And there are other studies like this going in another direction. For example, studying mifepristone as a method of birth control. And it all is a kind of blurring of these lines that in the past, abortion and contraception often were linked together, but we've kind of separated them in the modern era. And now it seems like some of these drugs have these interesting dual uses.
Do you think by tomorrow, there will be a lawsuit filed in Matthew Kaczmarek's district in Texas, which is claiming that Ella was approved despite terrible risks that no one took into consideration, and its approval needs to be reconsidered immediately and taken off the market. I bet there will be such a lawsuit.
It will take a little longer than tomorrow.
Since I know most of you have spent most of the week thinking about my journey in dry January, I want to give an update, which I tried one of those non-alcoholic spirits that I was talking about last week, which are the things that pass themselves off as non-alcoholic tequila and non-alcoholic whiskey. So I had a drink made with non-alcoholic tequila at a bar in Boston, and it was not very good. It was sweet. It was fine. I do, however, think the non-alcoholic beers are quite good. Non-alcoholic beers are very refreshing. Those could enter the Plotz lexicon.
The Athletic is so
very
good.
Crisp, very delicious. Yeah,
very. I mean, I'm like far more. I'm nearly addicted to them.
That would be ironic. that happened. That is not my chatter. My chatter is about a story this week coming out of Colorado, where the Colorado Supreme Court was asked whether 5 elephants that are held in a local zoo have the right to file habeas corpus to challenge their detention. And the Colorado Supreme Court said in a 6-0 ruling that they do not. These elephants do not. And this follows on a ruling. Also, New York, a similar case was brought in New York in 2022 involving an Asian elephant in the Bronx Zoo, which again, a court said they do not have the right to file a habeas petition. But it raises all sorts of interesting questions, because these are obviously like highly intelligent, highly social animals that are used to a certain kind of life. They have done nothing to deserve to be incarcerated in a prison. And it would not surprise me to see, as time passes, more and more and more legal rights, civil rights accruing to animals that they don't have yet, because it does. You only need to see an elephant in a zoo or see dolphins in an aquarium to feel like we are committing some terrible, terrible wrong by imprisoning them in this way. And it's interesting to see it litigated. Listeners, thank you for your chatter. Please keep them coming by emailing to us at gabfest@slate.com. And our listener chatter this week comes from Bob Rosner in San Francisco.
Hello, Gabfest. My chatter this week is about one of history's most catastrophic cases of what could go wrong. In 1859, English settler Thomas Austin released 13 rabbits in Australia for a shooting party, declaring, "The introduction of a few rabbits could cause little harm." These words would become one of history's great acts of hubris. Australia is now overrun with rabbits, despite the construction of a 2,000-mile rabbit-proof fence in the early 1900s, which proved to be a colossal failure. By 1920, these 13 rabbits had multiplied to an astonishing 10 billion, spreading across 70% of the continent. Containment measures have driven the population down to just 200 million before a recent surge. These persistent pests cost Australia's agriculture $125 million annually, have led to the degradation of pasturelands, and have helped drive native species to extinction. Thanks for a great show.
That's all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed, and it is a doozy. John starts as co-anchor of the CBS Evening News on Monday, and we're going to talk to him about what it's been like making his new show, what he's learning, what we should expect as viewers. That, however, is only for Slate Plus members, who also get other bonus episodes on other Slate podcasts. They get discounts to live shows. They never hit the paywall on the Slate site. So much more. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy it. If you're not a member, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus. Get access wherever you listen. That's our show for today. Our researcher this week is Julie Huygen, but it's also Emily Ditto, our new researcher. They both worked on it. So Emily, welcome to the Gabfest family. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations for Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson. I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.